lead us, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the
United States, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Emergency evacuation for those of you who are in district office. Be sure you know how to leave the building if you have to leave in an emergency, and no smoking. We have a smoke-free school district. Our sole item on the agenda tonight is discussion of the 2021 to 2022 budget. So Dr. Gianni, I'll turn that over to you.
Yes, thank you. As you mentioned, our one item for discussion this evening is our 7th in a series of budget discussions. It is a follow-up from last week's presentation on expenses and revenues, along with administration's proposed budget plan. We've also prepared a few slides to help give the board a deeper understanding of foundation aid, as well as why it's important for us to reduce expenses and be fiscally responsible. President Hayes, I'm not sure, do you want us to quickly go through the last presentation and focus more on the new slides? Or do you want us to try to hit highlights moving along, or what would you prefer?
I think it should not be for me, because I personally was satisfied with the presentation from last week. I am interested in hearing about the new slides because that gets into an area that has been concerning me a lot, which has to do with long-range planning, and I'm glad to see that. But I know there were members of the board who wanted to have this additional meeting. So I think the question is, do they want to hear more or go over the slides again from last week, or just go over the new ones? So why don't we do like a show of hands? Slides from last week only. The new slides from this week only.
No, I'd like to start with the new slides, and then we can refer back if that would be permissible to the board.
Okay, is that all right with everybody else, or does anybody want to go back and redo what we went over last week? Okay, I think start with the new slides, and if anything is raised that goes to the older slides, you'll deal with the question and answers there.
Okay, I'm gonna turn it over to Ms. Costa. We have it. She's gonna have to scroll through the slides to get there, but that'll be no problem. So, Ms. Costa, go right ahead and share your screen and begin.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Gianni. Hello, Board of Education and community. I am bringing up the slides. Are you seeing the front page that says Understanding Foundation Aid?
Yes.
I am.
Okay, great. So thank you, everybody. This is some supplemental slides to our last presentation last Wednesday. And we'll start right here. So last presentation, we left off with the administration's recommendation.
Ms. Costa, before you continue, I think we also see the animation and no notes. So I think you may be viewing
hang on, let me see.
Not full slide.
Give me 1 second. Hang on, I'm sorry. I am sharing nothing, correct, right now?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
No.
And let's try it. I apologize. I'm not even seeing the ability to share. Hang on one second. There we go.
There we go.
There
Perfect.
you go.
Let's get to the right slide.
It's still viewing that, but well, listen.
Hang on one second. I think I know why. Just give me, I'm sorry.
When you're on that, you can click your display settings so you get rid of your notes. So when you were on that, you were in presentation mode, and that's how it's going to come up, but you have to control from there your display settings so that your notes are not there.
I think I got it now.
Yes, now you have it.
You
Got
did-
it. Thank you very much, everybody, for your
No
patience.
problem.
So, let me just. Okay, so we left off at our last meeting last Wednesday, and we spoke about the recommendation of administration. So since that meeting, we added a couple of slides and to hopefully bring clarity as to South Country, our situation, where we are now going forward, and we're even going to look back a little. So we thought it was important to talk about foundation aid and why we must reduce expenses to close the gap here. So the first slide that we're going to look at, this is a summary of South Country's foundation aid since the beginning of the legislation back to 2007 and 8 school year. I'll go through what each of the columns are just so we all know what's happening here. The formula base, actually in the last 10 years, it turns into whatever you got paid in the prior year, and the prior year is in the column called current year aid, becomes your formula base for the next year. So if you start in year 2000, there'd been some legislative changes. So if you start back as far as 2010, 11, you'll see that the current year aid in one year becomes the formula base in the next year. And that's just how it works for almost all the years down. And then the column on the far right is the full phase-in level. That is if the formula was running as it was written in law, this is what you would get. So what is the foundation aid formula, and what was it supposed to be? It is an enrollment-based aid. It's actually an indexed enrollment-based aid. It takes your enrollment and it takes the needs of your students, and that's how it was born in legislation. It's important to note as we talk through this that South Country has declining enrollment, and we'll see that in the next couple of slides as we continue to talk. The important thing that happened when the state enacted the budget, there's been so many challenges to foundation aid. The Great Recession happened. We remember GEA. We remember all the challenges, which really made the state freeze foundation aid and be unable to let the formula run as it was written into law. But what happened last week was that they actually committed to how they're going to fully phase in foundation aid over the next 3 school years. So by the 23-24 school year, they have committed and have codified it, which is different than just words. They have committed to how they're going to do that. So that was news to all of us and something that has been out, in all of our advocacy groups for a long time. So now let's look at South Country specifically. So if we look at South Country, and I just boxed out the 21-22 year, in that year, you'll actually notice that in the current year aid column, it says $37.1 million. And in the column to the far right, it says $35.4 million. You'll actually see that we're actually receiving $1.6 million more than if the formula was running. So if we were to get the aid that the state says, or the formula says we would actually be getting less than we are getting now. So What does that mean for all the years going back to 2007 and 8? So I would like the board to see and the community to see that if you compare the current year aid column, which is the column in the center of the page, to if the formula was running, which is the column to the far right in the page, the full phase-in level, South Country is a district that has received $22.5 million more than if the formula was written by law. Now, that is not true for many districts, and we'll see as we continue forward in that conversation. So what does that mean for this year? For this year, the 21-22 school year, we're actually going to receive an increase of $1.2 million. We're going to talk a little bit more about that on the next page. You actually can see the formula base, which is what we received last year, is 35.9 million. And we're going to receive the 37.1. That is an increase to us of 1.2 million. But as I said, we're actually getting more than if the formula was running. So now we're going to take this forward as we have a basic understanding of South Country's foundation aid through the years. And we're going to look at how it compares to our surrounding districts, our cohort districts. So here's some data that I pulled together on the cohort districts around us. And I labeled the columns so we could speak about them and we can all be on the same page. Column 1, like on the prior slide, represents what the formula full phase-in is. If the formula was running, this is what every district would have got. For South Country, you see us in red, that was the 35.4 million on the prior slide. Column 2 up above here is in 2021, the school year that we're sitting in right now. This is how much aid that these districts all received, including us. Everybody's listed here. This is the aid they received. And then we're going to talk about the next 4 columns next to that. And basically, legislatively, what was written into legislation is they did 4 different calculations for districts in the state of New York. And they said, we're going to do the calculation 4 times under 4 different calculation types. And we're going to give districts that which is the highest for them. So the first calculation type, that's column A right here, is they took districts that have not yet received 60% of what their foundation aid would have been if the formula was running. So it really is 60% of column 2. In the whole state of New York, there's only 6 districts that fell into this bucket and who received that as their largest aid. They happen to be the districts, very high need districts with very increasing enrollments in those districts. So those are just 6 districts fell in that category. In column B, that's the phase-in increase column. And up above, I'm going to show you what that formula is. Basically, the state took the difference between columns 1 and 2. So that is, column 1 is what you would receive if the formula was running. Column 2 is what you're actually receiving. And it multiplied that difference by 26.25%. And it put those numbers down in that column, and it did it for every district. If you notice for South Country, we have nothing in that column, and we have nothing in column A, because we have been receiving more than that. So it doesn't apply to us, that calculation. So that's why we have a dash or a 0 in that column. Column C was the minimum legislative increase, which was 2% adopted by the legislature. And column D was a per pupil increase that's related to the needs of your students changing. We ended up falling in this bucket, and the column next to it, D $, actually represents the dollar sign, the dollars that are associated, because the $17,000 and $17,872 isn't representative of what we got. It equates to $1,208,000, which was our increase in foundation aid. So that's, if we look at South Country, again, we're receiving more than if the formula was written. So there is no calculation for us for option A, no calculation for us for option B, because we're already receiving more. The minimum increase for us would have been $718,000, but the per pupil indexed increase for us is $1.2 million, and that's where we fell. But now it's important for us to compare this to where some of our surrounding districts fall. So again, South Country is already receiving in excess of that amount. But let's look at Brentwood schools. Brentwood schools, for example, the formula says if it ran that they would receive $347 million in foundation aid. They're only receiving $212,000 in foundation aid. The difference between those two numbers is down below in the black box that just popped up. That's $134 million. So column B represents 26.25% of that $134 million difference. And that is $35.2 million, which is in column B for Brentwood Schools. So Brentwood Schools, that's their calculation for column B, and they did the calculation for column C and column D. They ended up receiving the column B amount, which is 26.25% of their difference. And the interesting piece to remember is that they have already codified in the 2 years subsequent to this, in year 22, 23, and 23, 24, they're going to get the balance of that money. So, for example, Brentwood is getting a 17% increase in their foundation aid for the 21-22 school year. And for the 22-23 school year, they'll have a minimum increase of 20%, and then another 17% increase in 23-24, where we received a 3% increase in foundation aid. So now comparing that to the rest of other districts that are right near us, Longwood, Patrick Medford, and William Floyd, all of those districts are in the same bucket as the example I just went over with Brentwood. In the box that just popped up right here, I'll have it pop up again. These are the increases in aid that these districts will receive in the next 3 years. Brentwood will receive $134 million, William Floyd, $53 million, Longwood, $30 million, and Patrick Medford about $17 million. They will have a very different story in the next 3 years than South Country School District will have. And they are in that position because both their enrollment is probably increasing and the needs of their student are increasing. Our needs of our student may have increased, but our enrollment decreased so much that that was the impact to South Country. So these schools are right around us, especially Longwood, Patrick Medford, and William Floyd, and they will receive, most of them will receive in excess of 10% increase in aid for the next 3 years. And that is a very different story than South Country. And if you look, everything that's highlighted in yellow on this slide in columns B, C, and D is what the district actually got. So you can visibly see. You can visibly see that almost all the districts that are our neighbors are falling into bucket B. Those are very large increases. And just for perspective, just so that the board knows, we're a district, as I said, that's been receiving more than the formula of foundation aid for a number of years to the tune of $22 million over the last number of years. There are 390 districts that are in the same position as the Brentwoods, the Longwoods, the Patrick Medfords, and the William Floyds in the state of New York. The state of New York has 675 school districts. 390 of them are in the same positions as these school districts, where they have not been receiving their formula-driven foundation aid for years. And there are some districts in our position who have been receiving more than we would have gotten. But it's just important for us to know that as we move forward, we will hear things from our surrounding districts, and their story is very different than ours. And their reliable recurring revenue will increase at a tremendous rate for them. So their story will be different than ours as we build budgets in the future compared to them building budgets in the future. So now let's take it forward. At our last meeting, we talked about the concept of restoring positions and our gaps. And now we're going to see South Country specific. What happens to our financial condition if we restore positions? So I'm going to do a little bit of just a little understanding of the accounting presentation of things so we all can read the slides and understand what we're seeing. So just bear with me for just a little bit. This is, in this school year that we're sitting in, 2021, this is an estimate of where our fund balance will be. Column A is our audited financial statements from last year. Your audited financial statements as of June 30th of any year become your opening balance on July 1st of the next year. Literally the next day, these become your July 1 balances. So these are our July 1, 2020 balances. And we know that in this school year, when we adopted the budget last year, we agreed to use $5.5 million in a fund balance and reserves. That's in column B. And we estimate this year that we'll be able to replenish about $5.6 million. Again, this number is very fluid, column C, just because of the pandemic and what we've had. But for conversation purposes, we are going to That's what we're going to say we are. Now, this yellow box is going to pop up on the next couple of slides. This yellow box represents, in our last meeting, we talked about the 21-22 school year and the FTEs that were reduced. The FTEs were reduced, and that equates to $2.3 million. That's the first line. And then we looked at slides that estimated what our gap would be in the future years. These are the gaps that were represented on those slides when we met last time. The 22-23 estimated gap was 1.4 million. The 23-24 was 1.6, and the 24-25 was 1.8. And the column next to it, that's the cumulative amount, just so we all know why is that there. The cumulative amount is there because if you restore $2.3 million in positions for 21-22, you have to replicate that in 22-23. And you have to add to it the new gap, because we are going, for this purpose, assume that our gap has to be closed by reducing expenditures, and reducing expenditures means reducing FTEs. So it's cumulative because we will have to cumulatively cover the costs of that restoration of positions into perpetuity. So that we're going to have that on each slide, so we just see the numbers. So again, I'm going to bring us back up to column AA above. That is where we anticipate we might be at the end of the school year. And now we're making a decision right now as we build this budget. So columns 1 and 2 are the decisions we make to use some of our unassigned fund balance. So in column AA, you see at the bottom $9.8 million, or it says unassigned fund balance, $9.8 million. When the board makes a decision to use fund balance for next year's budget, we historically use what's in column 2, which is $4 million. But if we make a decision to restore FTEs to the tune of $2.3 million, I just boxed it off, we have to represent that on our financial statements. So column AA and column A to the far right are the same information. They are required by financial statement presentations. You see they are the same number here. They're 9.8 million. They're just acknowledging this decision that the board is making with next year's budget. They're acknowledging that the board has agreed to use 4 million and to use 2.3 million. So that same $9.8 million in column AA is now represented in column A as showing that it's spoken for. But just an item to note, I know this is a little confusing because this is accounting stuff, we'll call it. We present this on the financials this way because these funds are used for general purposes. And that's why they get presented before the next school year as a segregation of those funds. But you notice we do not segregate the use of reserves here for next year. And we're going to see that on the next slide. So let me talk you through now. The next slide will take column A on the far right-hand side of this page, which has a total of $28.3 million. You see that, and it just replicates it on the next slide because again, the June 30th balance of any year becomes the July 1st balance of the next year. So we're now going into the next year, and here's the next column and the situation that we're in. That is the same column that's labeled A that was on the prior page. But you notice here, that $6.3 million of our uses, which is in column B, represents our $4 million of fund balance that we always use, plus the restoration of the positions of 2.3 million. So now we're at 6.3 million. And now we're in the next year and we can represent reserves. What do we mean by represent reserves? The reason why we represent them in the year that we use them is from an accounting perspective. They really can't be used unless you have corresponding expenditures. They're for a segregated purpose. So now we can use them now that we're sitting in the next school year. So this is really what we would use in the 21-22 school year. We would use $6.3 million of our assigned fund balance, and we would use these reserves. And we would anticipate that we could replenish them in column C, about $5.5 million, and that we would end 21-22 with $24 million. And then we would begin to build the next budget in 22-23, and that's how it works. And look what would happen in 22-23. We'd have to cover not just the positions from last year, which were 2.3 million, we'd have to cover 3.7 million because we'd be adding to it the next year's gap. And this is how it would be presented on our financial statements. We would see that in column AA, we have $8.9 million in unassigned fund balance, but we'd have to show it in column A on the right to be segregated 7.7 million and then still unassigned for 1.2. I'm sorry, that is still the same $8.9 million. It just has to be presented that way. Now we bring it forward just 2 more years, 2 years after next school year. And this is us bringing it forward yet again, same information. But now we're looking at this school year, 23-24. And now the $2.3 million in positions we restored from 21-22, that became 3.7 million the next year when we added to it 1.4. We're adding another 1.6 million, and now we have to restore $5.3 million in FTEs. And this is what gets presented. But this is the thing that, this is what we need to concentrate on a little bit. Already in this year, just 2 years out, we do not have enough unassigned fund balance to continue to support these positions. We are already running into a negative fund balance situation. And what that means is in column AA, you see that we only have $6.7 million of unassigned fund balance. But in columns 1 and 2 next to it, we're trying to use 5.3 plus $4 million. We're trying to use $9 million, but only have 6.7. And that's why in column A, you now see that there's a deficit of $2.6 million in our unassigned fund balance. So 2 years out from restoring positions, we already are in a financial cliff that is, that's a difficult cliff to be in, and one that from a fiscal stewardship point of view, we want to avoid that, especially what would happen to our program when that happens. And if we bring it out 1 further year from there and we make those decisions, 1 further year, here's the 1 further year, we officially are now at a position where we only had $2.8 million in unassigned fund balance, and we're looking to use $11 million. We're at an $8.4 million deficit, and that's just a couple of years out. So this is really, like we have said many times, projecting out with all the changes that are happening, pandemic, revenue, it's difficult, but this is the trend that would happen. This is what happens when one-shot revenue sources are used to support recurring expenditures, because once they're used, they're depleted and the expense doesn't go away, but the revenue does. So here is, so that's kind of a pro forma, and you see that the $8.4 million is difficult. So now we're going to circle back to where we were at our last meeting last Wednesday. And this continues to be the administration's recommendation on how we would close the gap. Just to recap, we started with a $16.8 million gap. At the March 10th meeting, the gap changed and went down to 16.5 million. That's what's in purple. And then on the March 24th meeting, the gap changed yet again. We went from 16.8 million down to 14.9, and that is the gap we're speaking about tonight. And the area in blue is our recommendation on how to close the gap. Everything that's in blue is also going to be summarized on the next slide. It has no gap. The recommendation includes the tax levy at the limit, at the calculation and at the limit. And on the next slide, we're going to summarize that which is in the blue box here. And that is, here's the summary and the recommendation. It is to use the following sources to close the gap, which is $4.5 million in rescue funds, $1.4 million in CRISA funds. We have additional state aid of $1.6 million. This is the only item on the page that is a recurring revenue on this entire page. We are recommending to use reserves and appropriate reserves and fund balance for a total of $7.3 million as it's represented there. And we have a slight accounting adjustment of $529 to close that gap. So that is our recommendation continues to be. Our next steps are to approve the multi-year plan for the use of the CRISA funds. And that multi-year plan, which we spoke about at our last meeting, involves $1.4 million in 21-22, $1.5 million in 22-23, and $1 million, the remaining $1 million in 23-24. And we are asking for approval of a multi-year planned use of rescue funds $4.5 million in 21-22, $3 million in 22-23, $1.4 million in 23-24. We're also asking for approval of appropriation of reserves and fund balance in the 21-22 school year for a total of $7.3 million as they are represented here. And that is our recommendation to close the gap. And in summary, we've had 7 budget meetings during this cycle already. Our next meeting is budget adoption meeting next Wednesday. May 5th will be a budget hearing required by law, culminates in our May 18th budget vote and trustee election. And that is the presentation for this evening.
Could I just ask a couple of questions just to clarify something? And before I do that, Dr. Gianni, there's one of those cartoon hands that has shown up on your video screen.
Yeah.
Is that from you or from somebody else?
No, it's not me.
Okay,
Yeah, I don't see it.
okay, because from my view, it looks like you posted that indicating your hand is up, and I was gonna say you didn't need to do that.
No, I didn't raise my hand.
Okay. What I wanted to clarify was this. The recommendation from the administration, which includes the 29 FTEs as a reduction. And I'd asked this question before, but I just want to clarify. That is solely because of our declining enrollment. And it has nothing to do with the financial situation that we were in this year. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And by saying that the FTEs, the reduction, that would result in no change in the programs that we're offering, both classroom as well as extracurricular?
That's correct.
And the recommendation is because of the need to look down the road, like we've just had the presentation with these additional slides, which is what I had been struggling with at our last meeting and was concerned about. But unless we take steps now to have the spending be related to what we need to operate our programs, and then we could end up in this much bigger gap problem about 4 or 5 years down the road.
Yes.
Is that what I understand from Ms. Costa's presentation? Yeah, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I also noticed that in your recommendation, and this was slides from last week, you've got 5 contingent positions. Are those positions in there in case we need them? In case this FTE plan doesn't pan out the way you anticipate, and you would have 5 positions that we could fund?
Yeah, they're in there for a couple of reasons. First, for as we prepared the budget and this budget and previous budgets, our staffing projections are just that. They're projections, right? It's not exact science. So we need to make changes along the way. Our projections are based on, March and April enrollments. So those contingent positions are twofold. They're for adjusting needs and enrollments that may change. And also, typically we put 1 or 2 in. This year we put 5 in because remember the board is looking, or the district is looking at what remote teaching may look like next year. So we put extra in there just in the event that we may need them for either enrollment changes or remote teaching.
And all of these plans from administration take into account what we anticipate will be the social and emotional needs of our children, especially given the impact of the last year's experience
Yes,
on.
yes, it does.
Okay, I have Miss Ancona.
Thank you. I have a question is why doesn't the star money get reflected into this budget?
I'll take that, Dr. Gianni, is that okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Star money is not a revenue to the school district. It is, we have control over the levy. And we calculate the levy calculation, we levy our taxpayers, and they have an agreement with the state for their star funds. Either they receive those people that are not in the star credit program, that you receive your star, like I mean myself, for example, I have star and it's represented on my property tax bill. It says how much my star is on there. Anybody who's part of the older program, they, instead of you paying your full tax bill, you pay the tax bill as it's represented to you, and the state pays the share that's represented on that bill directly to the school district. We only get our full levy. So if the district's levy is $65 million, we may get $60 million directly from the town of Brookhaven for that which they've collected directly from the homeowners. And then the state will pay us the star pieces for those people to the tune of 5 million, but we never get any more than our levy. So star funds are not any additional revenues to the district. They just come to us directly from the state because it's an agreement with the homeowner and the state of New York.
So it's technically built into that budget then. It's just not broken down that way.
Correct. It's not a revenue source to the school district.
Okay. And then my next question was with the staffing cuts, with the retirement, and I believe that Ms. Fleas asked about retirement incentives for the upcoming school year. Have we looked into that, like to try to save more than 5 positions?
What type of retirement incentives?
So didn't we say that, I think Ms. Fleece, and correct me if I'm wrong, asked about that, like having retirement incentives so we can keep people on, so the people would have some kind of incentive to retire, I guess, what is it, Cheryl, earlier? Or can you explain that? Because I was listening on the YouTube after the meeting, so I was trying to get some kind of clarification on that.
Well, typically, unless the state offers a retirement incentive, then the district offer it through contract negotiations. So different municipalities and districts are able to do that. There was a seminar today that I attended. It was a free webinar with the New York State School Board Association, and they went over the analysis of the budget and the retirement incentive that many districts and teachers advocated for was only approved for New York City. It was for other districts. So we would have had to fund it, but for those early incentives, but we're not able to partake in it because it didn't pass through the state. Only for the city it passed.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
And let me just comment on, we present the budget and the staffing analysis in terms of FTEs or full-time equivalent positions. Just because we have 29.2 reductions in positions doesn't mean 29.2 people are losing their jobs, okay? So some of those positions will be absorbed through attrition. Some of those positions will be absorbed through the 5 contingent positions. Some of those positions will be absorbed by a combination of certification areas that people may be certified for. It is our role and job not to access if we don't have to, and to look for positions for folks before they are accessed. Some of those positions may end up in 0.8 positions and not full-time equivalent positions. But I don't want the board to think that 29.2 people are going to hit the streets. Yes, some folks will be accessed, but not to the magnitude of 29.2.
I mean, not that I want anybody to lose their job, but can you narrow it down a little? Not that I'm going to hold you to it, but what are we looking at? Are we looking at half of that, a quarter of that?
I would guesstimate that it's probably about half that we'd be able to find something for.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but again, I appreciate you saying you're not going to hold me to that.
Thank you.
So Ms. Aruda next, and then I think I saw Ms. Felice's hand, so we'll do it in that order.
Sure. Thank you. And just some clarification, on slide 26, when we are breaking down the foundation aid, I do notice that many of the districts that we looked next to, they were very large districts in comparison to ours. Maybe you can explain it a little bit with a district that's a little bit smaller in size like ours. And I do know that, you know, obviously the amount of state aid goes by the need. The comparison of Brentwood compared to South Country, I think it's kind of apples and oranges when it comes to the dollar amount. So maybe utilizing a district that may be a little bit more similar financially and in size to us may help to also break that down. Would you be able to do that, Ms. Costa, or is that a little too much to ask on the spot? I apologize.
I'm going to start by just saying that, you know, the takeaway there is really not the number, but the fact that South Country's been getting more than their fair share in foundation aid while these other districts have not. I'll certainly let Ms. Costa try to answer that, but it is a tough one.
I do have a follow-up. I do have a follow-up to that, but thank you.
Sure, if you'll notice on the slide, can you see the slide? Do you want me to bring?
Yes, I'm looking at the slide on my personal computer. Thank you.
Okay, if you look at Rocky Point, actually, that's a district that is similar in size, a little smaller than us. You'll actually notice that they too are in the same boat as Brentwood, Longwood, Patrick Medford, and William Floyd. The takeaway is that I wrote down 390 school districts, more than half of the school districts in the state of New York have not been receiving their phased-in foundation aid, and we are one of the few districts that have been receiving more than our fair share. And the takeaway to that is that, like a Rocky Point, they are going to be receiving also tremendous increases compared to us, when we're going to be getting 2 or 3. I wouldn't be surprised. I would expect to see us only fall in the bucket of column C and D in the foreseeable future with a minimum increase. But we're going to be hearing about our neighbors, let's say the Rocky Points and all the other neighbors, the Patchocks, the William Floyds. They're going to have a lot of money to spend on a lot of programs that we are going to be in a very different story than they are. And that is, you know, if you talk to the state, it's related. They have had much more students and more need and haven't received the revenue. And we've received more revenue than is needed to meet the needs of our students. So the takeaway is that our story and our long range planning for budget planning is going to be different if you are watching South Country's meetings as if you're watching Rocky Point's meetings that are getting over 10% increases in their reliable revenue. They're going to be able to add and do things that we will not be able to do.
Okay, and thank you for clarifying that. I think it was important that you were able to see that in a district comparable in size and financial need to us. And the second question I have is, I do recall, I don't believe I was on the board at the time, or maybe it was my first year. And I do know that BOCES gives us our projections of enrollment for pupils. And I know that there was a decline in that, and that was pre-pandemic. However, I do foresee that we will see an enrollment increase under the current situation that we have. Are we prepared as a district in the 2021-22 school year, 22-23 school year, to be able to have that population increase? Because I do strongly believe, based upon what's going on in the country and what's going on here on Long Island, that we will see an enrollment increase. And I think that if BOCES were to create their enrollment projections now, we might see something different than we did before. So moving forward.
I think you're referring to the 10-year study we contracted for. So that's not something that's annually done. We anticipate, I think, what you're anticipating, and that's also part of the reason we have 5 contingent positions in the budget to provide for spikes in enrollment as a result of that. I certainly can't plan out beyond next year, but the following year rather. But for next year, that's another reason why we have 5 contingent positions in the budget.
Okay, because like I said, I do believe that we will start to see enrollment increases next year and definitely the following year. So I just need, I need to say that publicly for the board to hear and for administration. So thank you.
You're welcome.
We should see corresponding increases in foundation aid if our enrollment really does increase, because it is an enrollment-based aid.
Okay. And that's exactly why I had asked, as opposed to the larger districts, if we could clarify it with a district that is a little bit smaller. I am very familiar with foundation aid. NYSED has been fighting for this aid for years upon years, as well as other committees. So I have, closely followed the foundation aid debacle that has happened prior in previous years.
A positive takeaway is that there isn't anything legislatively to date that would allow the state to do anything more than minimum increases, meaning there would be no takeaway from districts at this point in time that fell into our bucket. While we are we don't represent the majority of the state, but that's always been a fear for those districts. That there was a hold harmless clause. As at this point it's silent, and there has not been any conversation to that effect, that minimum increases would be forthcoming into the future.
Thank you.
Ms. Felice, you were next.
Thank you. I want to talk about staffing first, and then I want to go back to slide 11. So where you have on, let's see, what slide should I start that with? Well, you have your projection about staffing. You have your little summary on the bottom of the page. So I guess we'll start with slide 26. No, 27. 27.
What's the caption on it, please?
The caption is potential effects on fund balance if expenses are not reduced in 21-22.
Thank you.
So, Ms. Costa, I think it's best that you project it because the public can't see what Ms. Felice is referring to.
Sure.
Why don't you project the slide that she's referring to?
Thank you.
I'll bring the whole slide up.
Thank you. Yes, that's the one.
There you go.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So on the bottom, highlighted in yellow, where you are referencing the position if no cuts were made and the cost of those positions going forward. This estimate makes no provision for retirements, does it not?
That is correct. It does not, it doesn't address if there's any attrition. It was the gaps. Well, we do know for sure in 21-22, those are the dollar value of the FTEs that would need to be restored if we were to restore all FTEs. But in the out years past that, 22, 23 and beyond, it assumes that the gap has to be closed with expenditure reduction, which would be FTE reduction.
Okay. So is that a reasonable assumption that we would have no retirements in 4 subsequent years to cause this, this kind of expense?
Well, it's an assumption that, like, this year we had very little attrition that we've had shown the least attrition that we've had in a while. And it's a reasonable assumption to look at that the effect of supporting recurring expenditures with one-time revenue sources, how quickly that gets you into a certain situation. But yes, you're right. If there was attrition and we had no gap in 22 or the whole gap in 22, 23 could be covered with attrition, yes, that makes the situation change. But for the purposes of conversation, it's that they would have to be covered with some form of reduction in expenditures.
With the end of the last school year, so that would have been the 19-20 school year.
Yep.
And the pandemic had just hit. Did we have more retirements that year because of the pandemic than you normally would have seen? I didn't go back to take a look at that. Do you have
We
that?
we had more than this year, but I don't know if that was a result of the
Of the
pandemic.
pandemic?
Yeah.
Okay.
We were unusually low this year.
Yeah.
We typically have more retirements than we did this year.
And I thought the same, which is why I asked the question, and I only realized it later. To not ask it beforehand, that maybe more retired at the end of last year. And that's why we saw less this year.
You know, and retirements, remember, you know, that are able to be absorbed through attrition, the expense is gone, right? So that serves two purposes. What it does is save people, but still eliminates positions when they can be absorbed.
And saves the district money because we're starting new teachers at a lower salary.
Correct.
You know, any staff member. Okay, back to slide 11, if you would, please.
And could you give the caption on that one?
Certainly. That one is the financial challenge.
Thank you.
I'll bring up the whole slide with all of its little caricatures.
Yes. Thank you.
Give me 1 second. There you go.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I believe the reason there's confusion over the STAR money is because of line 2 in this particular slide, where it says state aid governor excludes pre-K and STAR.
Yes.
That gave me the indication that we're missing money as a revenue source. Now, you clarified it tonight, and I sent a subsequent question to the superintendent today, and he further clarified to say it's almost 5 million. It's $4.994 million. That's part of that money that comes directly back to the budget. But why do we say there it excludes STAR? And then I'll ask my follow-up question about the pre-K money.
Sure.
Why do we need to say that?
Well, in the prior presentation, when we I'm just going to go back one slide if you don't mind. Just give me
Sure.
a second. I was going to go back one slide and just say something that when we were here,
That one is state aid,
Thank you.
President.
it was this slide right here. This is,
No, that's another one.
so we were recapping where we were the prior meeting, which was the governor's proposal. And if you remember when we spoke about the governor's proposal, we were talking about how he represented in his runs very differently state aid, the pandemic adjustments. He was bringing in STAR, and there was a lot of conversation about what he was even doing. And he represented STAR, and he was showing it as a reduction, meaning he was no longer going to fund, he was treating STAR and trying to treat some STAR like it was some form of revenue for schools. There was a lot of legislative activity saying that it was opposed, ultimately was opposed by, in the enacted budget, that STAR is not state aid. And he was trying to marry it to stop giving increases that we would bear the increase. So for example, I think we gave it one time in one of the meetings, he would still have his commitment to an individual homeowner that if STAR supplanted $1,000 of their property tax bill, he would still supplant the $1,000, but he would only give $800 to the school district. It was the school district who was going to pick up what he was going to cut. And he was still going to tell the homeowner, you're good for the $1,000, and it would just not come to us. So we would never receive our full levy. And that was very highly contested. It didn't go through in the final, and it was the first time that STAR was ever presented in the state aid run. So when we moved this slide forward, I'm going to move it forward now. It's a lot of clicks, but I'm going to do it. We're going to move it forward to that slide 11. And when we moved it forward, if this was the enacted budget right here, and they went back to the original presentation, if you look at the top, it's 2021. And if you look at the bottom, it's 21-22. There is no longer any reference to STAR. That is not true when you saw the governor's run. So all this did in the next slide was bring it forward to it was recognizing in that notation, Ms. Felice, that that is what the governor did say and what he did do. And we were comparing the governor's proposal to the enacted budget that changed. So the confusion is just that his state aid run was not apples to apples to the enacted budget state aid run, but that's what he did reference when he when he developed his budget. So in the governor's numbers, which is the second column for the fourth column for us, that actually included that example of the $200 difference to a homeowner. We were going to bear that cost, and it was representative in our 2% reduction in state aid. That was what was coming through on the governor's proposal. It was one of the many components that were contributing to our reduced state aid. But now we moved forward to the legislative proposal, and that was not included anymore. They were not going to marry Star. They were going to keep their commitments to the homeowners, and they were going to keep their commitment to the school, that whatever commitment they made to the homeowner, that money would come forward to the school as promised.
Yeah, that was something that was also spoken about by the legislators at the long legislative breakfast. Our local legislators and state legislators were opposed to that from the start. So this particular slide 11, was before we knew what the final numbers were going to be. So
well, these were comparing the governor's numbers to the final numbers. And in his, see, it says state aid dash governor, he referenced Star and tried to make it look like we were getting more money, but it really was never going to be a revenue source to the district.
So in going forward, would we put that reference in there going forward?
No, we would not. So we would forever be gone, that we would never be referencing Star again.
And I think that would be helpful to the board and the community to understand.
Yes.
So the follow, thank you. So for the follow-up to that, it says it also excludes pre-K money. So we have pre-K grant money that is a revenue source. And so what is that money and why is that listed as an exclusion?
The state aid run has historically included pre-K dollars on the run, but it has been determined by the state that it must be recorded in a special aid fund. And it is not a general fund revenue source. It is just an indicator on the state aid runs of what your allocation is. It's similar to our IDEA funding, our title grant fundings. They are not represented on the state run. It's just back in time, pre-K allocations were indicated on there, but they are not accounted for in the general fund. So they must be subtracted out from the bottom line of what you see on the state aid runs.
But we receive them.
We receive it, it goes into the special aid fund. It's not a general fund revenue.
So where on the special aid, on that chart, is the special aid fund?
So here, when you go back to the state aid run, they show you, if you actually see the box highlighted in blue, it's the third number down. That is the pre-K allocation, $624,000, $624,380. That is the pre-K allocation for our district. But it is, NISBA, NISCUS, all organizations say, always warn you to be careful not to include that as a general fund revenue source because it must be funded and accounted for in the special aid fund.
So is it part of, and it's not part of CRISA and it's not part of the rescue?
Correct. It's not part of any of those. It's a grant, just like we get IDEA and title grants.
As each of those are. As each of those item numbers are. Those are all funded grants. Okay. I'm still back on slide 11.
Sure.
So we have the designated fund balance, the reserves, the transfer of debt services, where we had a repayment back to the community of $600,000 a year. As I recall, that had a time frame on it, and I did ask the question, and I believe the superintendent answered it. We're in our last year of repaying that particular 600,000 debt service.
That is excess funds that have accumulated in the debt service fund. And because they accumulate for many reasons, many times it's from capital projects that come in under budget. And there was a 5-year plan to use those excess funds, 21-22 school year that we're building that budget now. There's the 5-year plan would end in that year. And this $574,000 is the last amount remaining in the debt service fund, we give it back to the general fund in a planned manner like we are, because the fund that pays the debt or the bond issues gets that money back. So when there are accumulated funds in a debt service fund, they accounting wise always go back to the general fund, and they usually go back on a plan because like other things, they're one-time revenue sources. So you do that in a planned manner.
So we'll have $600,000 less that we need to budget for next year because we've eliminated that.
Well, in 21-22, we're using 574,000. That is the last of that fund. And when we go to build 22-23's budget, you are correct. There is no longer any more funds in the debt service fund.
So we're $600,000 ahead in the next budget is what I'm trying to point out.
You mean behind?
No, ahead, because we no longer have to repay.
No, we don't repay it. It's
Every
giving us money. The debt service fund gives, the debt service had extra money in it.
But that was money that we owed to the community, was it not?
We owe it to the community because they are the ones that funded the capital work that we did. And they came in under budget or under, there was excess monies and it came in under budget. And that money, yes, repays the general fund because it's the taxpayers who are paying the debt on those bond issues.
All right. I think that's it on that slide. I have a few more questions. And it's reference to, Ms. Hayes, I didn't know if you were able to attend today's webinar with, not with, were you?
Not in its entirety. I had other things that were interfering, but it's on video and I intend to watch it in its entirety.
Okay. Yeah, they did say the video would come out shortly, so hopefully it'll be out before the next meeting. But it was very informative in going over what the organization, what New York State School Board Association advocated for, what various other groups advocated for, and how the budget actually turned out. And so the question that was raised earlier, you can take that slide now, if you don't mind, Ms. Costa.
Take down the presentation, I'll stop sharing.
Thank you.
There you go.
All right, thanks. So in reference to the early retirement incentive that Gina asked earlier, it's unfortunate that the state didn't allow it for statewide and that it's only citywide, because that would have allowed people who had age 50 years and to their retirement age, they could have gained time to retire early between 50 and 55. It would have given those with 55 and 25 years a chance to retire with no penalty. And it would have encouraged more people to retire at higher salaries, and we wouldn't have had, we would have an attrition issue that we could deal with to hopefully avoid layoffs. So that was unfortunate, but those were the type of things they went through. The tax cap changes that, that many of us advocated for were not enacted. The STAR enhancement that was spoken about earlier, and how it was to be restricted. Of course, those bills were also that was taken care of by the legislature. The other particular important for us is devices and the connectability with our Chromebooks and also hotspots that the state budget did approve monies to go towards for connectability in districts. So we need to look at what kind of money will be coming back to the district that we already allocated to spend on those devices. I know the devices don't last forever, and we did talk about a plan to turn those over. So we need to look at that. And again, this only came out today, and I did forward it to everybody to take a look at. What it also included, the state budget also included, that is going to be a cost to our district, is free COBRA coverage for anyone who gets laid off between April 1st and September 30th. COBRA is an extension of your health insurance benefit. Anyone who is let go has a chance to purchase the cost of health insurance for a period of 18 months. There's other factors in there if they retire with disability, but the minimum is 18 months that an individual can pay for that insurance until they get other insurance. In this particular legislation, it says the district must pick up that money. So we need to look at those positions that if we do get to that point, the district is going to have another expense of paying for health insurance for up to 18 months.
Ms. Felice, can I add clarity there, please?
Certainly.
Yes, it is funded 100% by the federal government. So I've been in a couple of
That's going to
webinars.
come out of the stimulus money?
You actually get a tax credit on the tax, on your tax filings that we do quarterly here as a district. We literally will take a credit and 100, yes, they will get funded, the employee who may have lost their coverage, but we get 100% of the money back from the federal.
You'll get that. Excellent. Okay, you already looked into it. Perfect. So these were just, some of the things that had come up. Foundation aid was spoken about, very, very much so, because as we talked about in our legislative committee, we wanted predictability on state aid. And that was one of our difficulties that we had. And I know, NICE had looked at the same thing. We all looked at the same thing, but that was another big issue that was addressed to some degree. Expenses with flexibility, where we were, there was an opportunity for districts to utilize reserves over and above what they were restricted to, and then give the districts an opportunity to pay them back. That was not approved. So there is no flexibility there. That's something else to note. The other grants that are available to us is the learning loss funding for programs that are limited in nature. In other words, they have a finite ending to them. It's not for sustaining, unfortunately, not for sustaining costs like salaries, but summer programs, extended day programs to help with that loss of learning that we've encountered because of COVID. Is the district prepared to look at those fundings and those grants and apply for them?
Yes, we are aware of each of those, including the device grant that you indicated, and we are exploring that.
Okay, great. And then, okay, we spoke about retirement, we spoke about nutrition. All right, you know what? I've spoken enough. I'll give others an opportunity to speak. Thank you for your time and your patience and your answers. And I reserve the right to go back and ask additional questions should I have them. Thank you.
Anybody else with questions right now?
I have some questions.
Mr. Trent?
Yes. So News 12 did a report about state funding for full-time pre-K will allow them. Can you speak a little bit about that, Ms. Costa?
We did not receive any different additional allocations for pre-K. If districts received the potential for additional funding, it was represented on their state aid run, and we received no additional funding.
Can you talk about the loss in miscellaneous revenue that we had this year? Can you just mention a little bit about what that was?
Sure. Miscellaneous revenue last year, when we were about at this time of the, I don't even know it was this time of the year last year. Last year was a little crazy, but we were trying to close our budget gap last year. One of the ways that we closed the budget gap was in 3 different manners. We appropriated fund balance and reserves. We reduced expenditures. And the third way, because we still had a budget gap, we were trying to get to the end of the line last year. And with 2 of our bargaining units, the BTA and the SCAA, the administrators and the teachers units, we negotiated a deferral of their salaries. They each agreed to a 2-week deferral of their salaries that equated to $1.7 million. That $1.7 million was a one-time revenue source to the district. And once that ended, which is 2021 school year, it's this year. And that's why you see that increase in miscellaneous revenue during 2021. And you see it declining in 21-22, because it was a one-shot deal. We got them, they agreed to give up a 2-week paycheck, but they only agreed to do it for 1 school year. So now we have to come up with that money for the following school year. And that was how we closed the budget. That was a one-shot revenue source to close that budget that year.
No, I thought that check that was held from them is paid when they separate from the district.
It is, we ultimately have to pay that back no matter what. It was in the MOA, it identifies when the first time, we have to pay back anyone who separates from service from the district. So if they separate from service immediately, we pay them back. But after that, there's a scheduled payback. It begins 4 years after we finalize that MOA. So we'll be building costs into our budget. We actually have had to build costs in anyway, because for the unanticipated staff that leave every year, who will get that their funds back. We have people who we withheld money this school year in 2021, and they'll be retiring at the end of 2021. We got to give them the money right back. So we already have a couple of people that applies to. But what happened there is we then, by doing that and adding revenue 1 year, the second year, we then had to cover that increase and cover their next salary increase. So in the 21-22 budget, we had a double impact of that. We had to now cover those costs more than once. We lost that revenue, and they got their next raise for their next school year on top of that.
So the 29 full-time positions that are being cut this year is about $1.8 million. Is that correct?
The
0.9, is it?
the net effect of the additional positions and the cut positions is $1.5 million. It's a little like 1.55 million, but the value of just the FTE reductions is 2.3 million. But we then added additional positions because we have needs in the district, the 5 contingent positions. There were adds in a couple of other areas, special education, and I believe art, and there were a couple of adds. And the net effect of the adds and the reductions is 1.5. But if we absolute value out just the reductions in FTEs, that was 2.3 million.
So the future budget projections for the 23-24 and the 24-25 school year on pages 16 and 17 have a possible budget gap of 1.6 and 1.8 million dollars. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, at the bottom of those pages, it says it assumes the gap will be closed with cuts / attrition. So are we planning to fill those 1.6 now $1.8 million gap with those cuts of the employees?
We will address those as we have done previous budget development processes, and that's through attrition and reduced staff as a result of less need, not program cut. So as our enrollment declines, we anticipate less need, and we'll attempt to do that through attrition, and we'll also attempt to do it through efficiencies that we may realize in other areas.
So what I'm trying to get to, though, Dr. Johnny, is the number. Because if this year is 29 full-time positions, about $1.8 million, the gap on page 17 is $1.8 million. So I'm assuming that the gap is going to be filled with about 29 full-time equivalent positions.
Yeah, I can see how you're making that analogy, but it's really not a good or accurate way to do that.
Okay, so you want to talk about how we're gonna close the remaining gap on page 16 and 17 at a later time?
You mean in years to come?
Yes.
Yeah, I really can't speak to that now. It's hopeful that we will be able to do it through attrition, but we also have, as I said, realized other efficiencies where we've saved money. A good example is the transportation change that we made just last year. We saved some money in that. The recommendation to move pre-K to CBO, that was an efficiency gained. I'm not sure exactly what it was. I think it was about $650,000 net. So we will continue to look at efficiencies and continue to look to save positions through attrition. But it will depend upon what our student needs are and how our enrollment is.
But I would like to talk about that sooner than later, because on page 17, we've used all of the cursor grant money, the rescue grant money. You know, we've used our reserve money, you know, up until then. You know, you have the attrition or the staff cuts, and then we still have an $8.6 million gap overall. So if the goal is to balance the budget, to have our revenues equal to expenditures, it doesn't look like we're going to be cutting enough, because we're still going to have about an $8 million gap.
Well, we believe that over time, we will be able to realize those efficiencies. I cannot promise you that we may not have to make reductions that are unpleasant, but we are hopeful that we will not have to do that, and that we will realize most of the savings through attrition. If we were not to make those reductions this year, the cliff would be very steep and very very deep in the following years and the years to come.
So the years to come, I guess my concern is making sure that, we aren't in this situation again. So what I see is we're using the grant monies to bring down our expenses, but it doesn't look like we're going to be doing it, enough, because once those monies are gone, we're still going to have a large gap. That's really my concern at the end of the day, is years to come, where will we be?
Well, we should, Mr. Trent, we should continue to always update the out years as we speak, because there are a lot of moving parts. One of them is you have to make assumptions as to how much revenue you might receive, how your levy might increase. And a lot of those things, if we've learned nothing through the pandemic, is it's very fluid. And just a couple of months ago, Governor Cuomo was speaking about how dire everything is. And now things look very different for many districts across the state. So it's yes, that is our picture, built on the assumptions of us getting minimal foundation aid increases and minimal tax levy increases, because that's what our tax levy increases have been. But those factors can change, and our expenditures can change. They can come in over or under budget, and they could make that gap smaller or larger. But really what the conversation is that we have a gap, and there's one-time revenue from the federal government is helping us not deal with the gap all this year, but be able to address it in the out years, and maybe in a way that we can absorb it palatably. Maybe we will have attrition that works through most of it. Maybe we will get a little more in foundation aid, or our levy will be a little higher, and the gaps won't be as great as we're anticipating. But for conversation purposes, it's important for us to see what our trend is. Our trend is our trend, and we hope for it to be better, and we hope for us to have easier decisions to make that impact the children the least and the program the least. So I don't know if we could make a plan for $1.8 million 3 years from now, because there's so many moving parts that would impact that. But it's important for the community and the board to see the decisions we make this year don't solve all of our problems, but there could be things that happen that could make things easier for us. We could get more money. Maybe Chromebooks are covered by the state, and we have now a recurring expense in our budget of over $350,000 for Chromebooks. Maybe the state does an initiative in the future, because we legislate for it, that they cover those costs. And there are so many things that are going to change and happen, but it's important for us to see just what our future picture potentially looks like.
I don't have any more questions at this time.
The fortunate thing is this plan allows us to cover the projected expenses for next year without having to go over the tax cap. And that was something we'd started out at the beginning being concerned about, and back before we got the updated information about the state aid and the funds available to us, had looked like something we would have to talk about. Luckily, we don't have to do that this year. And your proposal means that for next year, depending on how enrollment goes and how attrition goes we may or may not have to have that discussion next year, but it puts us in a position where the amount that we'd be talking about is not as high as we had feared a few weeks ago. So if there's any positive spin to put on this financial situation, I guess that's what it is, that we will now be able to embark on some longer range planning to see what can be done in order to have the stable revenue source that makes it possible to do the planning that we need to do in order to continue the services to our children. And through our legislative committee and, you know, the efforts that have gone on in Albany, it looks like there's been a few inroads, not as many as we would like, but it's better than where we were a month ago. Are there any other questions? Ms. Felice?
I just have one, just a couple of final questions with the rescue plan and the spending plan requirements. Am I reading this correctly? Have you come across this yet, Dr. Gianni or Ms. Costa, about how we use the stimulus money? That plan has to be posted on our website. Are you aware? You're aware of that plan for that?
Yes.
And
Guidance
that's
is anticipated to come out by April 30th.
Okay, but we have to post that by July 1st? Okay, all right, so we're making provisions for that. Also, I made the, in reading the emails today, I made the mistake of opening the public contact and not the Board of Education attachment for the budget. And I was reminded that we don't present the full presentation to the public before the board sees it. And I just think that's a bit disingenuous, and I'd like the board to reconsider that. I was told that it was a prior board, and I don't know if it was the prior board that I was on, Dr. Gianni, when you gave me that answer. I don't recall us making that provision. If we did, I'd like to change it now, but if we didn't, I'd like the board to consider. With a budget like this, with what we're facing, I think it's only fair that we produce a budget and the proposed budget that everybody sees, that the public sees at the same time that we are, so that they can forward questions to us if they have them. They can submit questions to us. Of course, if it was in person, it would, you know, actually the in-person piece doesn't even apply here. But just to reconsider that we had two different PowerPoint shows, one that the public saw. The public will see this full presentation now that we have seen it. But I think it would be a gesture of goodwill that we publish it beforehand. So you know, we want our community to support the budget. Let's let them see it, you know, before we have our meeting, so that if there are questions.
I just wanted to comment on that in terms of the budget itself, they saw what we saw. The additional slides that we got late this afternoon had to do with, you know, the foundation aid calculation that we look at for the future, but it didn't affect the way the budget had been presented. So I just wanted to clarify that, you know, which is maybe, it's
No, I appreciate
not
that.
not objecting to what you said, but rather just to clarify that the public did see the actual budget that was presented to us.
And may I just get clarification from administration that when the budget was first presented, was that indeed put on the website, on the board docs?
Which one?
Please,
Yeah.
Lord.
Which presentation? So we put up on public what you saw last week, and then we put in administrative content what was new to the board, and that was those few slides at the end.
Well, as we went along, so from the first meeting, January 20th, was there anything on board docs?
No, everything is posted on the website that the board has seen
Well,
After the meeting or before?
after the meeting.
After, that's my point.
Yeah.
So
And-
the
and
public
it was-
didn't see.
It was administration's practice to provide it at the meeting for the public to see, but that, like I said, a previous board did not want to have that out before the board seen it or saw it. I don't, it doesn't matter to me. I
The
mean.
board should see it the Thursday before when you send out the update.
Well, no, the public wouldn't see it the Thursday before. The public would see it.
The board, I'm saying the
day
board would
before.
see it.
Yeah, yeah. The board would see it earlier,
Yeah.
but,
But once board doc goes live, I think whatever the board is going to see outside of executive session, whatever the board is going to see, I think the public should see, and I would just ask the board to reconsider that. We can have that conversation at the next meeting.
Yeah, I would,
I'm
I
fine with
agree.
that.
That would be something to discuss later. And I guess the point I was trying to make is that's almost different though than the situation we're in, because the actual budget was already up there. It went up after our meeting last week. And that is still what we have. It's just the additional slides.
I understand that. I'll give you for example, maybe this will clear it up. The STAR money. I was under the same confusion that many community members were, and community members reached out to me to ask, why are we not including the STAR money? And so that question had to be cleared up. But so the clarification that was put in here, with a little more detail, I think it would help our community in
But
understanding.
I think the biggest thing that helped was Ms. Costa's verbal narrative. She explained that very clearly. And
I don't know that every.
so we had the
community
benefit
member-
of that.
Yeah, I don't know that every community member is going to be watching the board meetings. I do believe during the closure, were we not sending it? I know that there was an issue during budget time because we were displaying our virtual meetings differently. Weren't we putting that out there for the public to see, Dr. Gianni?
What, presentations?
The presentations, because they were not able, because we were obviously presenting our meetings differently last year during the closure. Weren't we giving the presentations prior?
No, I think we would do, we were doing it when we were in the boardroom and it was on YouTube. That's how we were doing it.
Right, but then there was an issue with them not being able to see it. So I thought that we were linking it maybe prior. I do recall having a conversation, but I agree with you, Mrs. Felice. It definitely is something that needs to come out to the public before. I know prior to being on the board and sitting through various budget presentations to go through them, and then I'd have to kind of try to go back and find the information if somebody had questioned me because I was there. So moving forward, I know that we're a little bit off topic. I do agree with you, Ms. Felice, that it really should be out there for the public to review, as soon as board docs goes live, so that they have a day or two to review it and
Well-
come and ask questions.
And this, I think, is a topic that we ought to be discussing on a next agenda about exactly when these things will be posted.
Sure.
I was under the impression that they were posted as the meeting went live, that they would be able to see them. Is that not happening?
They only see it during the presentation. So they actually see the presentation.
Okay.
And that's why I'm saying, I know that in the shutdown, we did put them into board docs because they could not see them the way that we were in the boardroom. Because we were
Yeah,
presenting.
we may have made them live.
Yeah, I think
Excuse me, went
something along
live,
those
you know.
lines.
I-
But regardless, I definitely think it's something that we should change moving forward.
And again, administration has no problem either way, whichever the board.
Yeah, no, I was really clarifying it more with the board. But thank you.
Thank you as well.
If we'll get that added to the agenda for our next meeting, then we could have a discussion and a decision made at that time.
Oh, sure.
So
Are there any other
I just-
questions?
Yeah, I just wanted, the good thing is the public has the budget because it went up after our last meeting. And that was what we were working on tonight again. And now what they will get are the additional slides that have to do with the foundation aid issues going out over the next several years. I think there's no further questions. Is there, we're set for our next meeting, at which point the administration will be asking for approval of the recommendation. And then from there, according to the schedule, we will have the budget hearing, which I think is it's early May 6th, I think it was.
May
And then after May 6th, and then after that will be the budget vote. So it's like you pointed out, this is the 8th meeting, and it's been a lot of information to digest, and thank you so much for your presentations and for clarifying it.
So administration will, based on what you've heard tonight, administration will prepare a presentation for the board next week, which will be much shorter than this one and will reflect what we talked about in the form of a budget adoption. Okay, thank you all so much.
All right, I need a
actually, you have a
motion.
meeting. Yeah, you got a meeting.
I
to
need a
close.
motion to adjourn. I see Ms. Ancona, second by Ms. Aruda. All in favor? I see 1, 2, 3, 6 hands. And no opposition to that. So we're now adjourned.
Night.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.